congratulations on this film. This is fantastic. And Kristen, let's start with you. I mean, the movie has just a fantastic opening in itself, showing the older documentary footage and how it really breaks the fourth wall in that next moment. And you said it's something that, you know, you were able to tell your own story with it, and you wanted to take that into your own hands. So when you were looking back on that old footage, you know, what was it that you wanted to really convey and now in the Stroll and make your own? I think someone in the film says, you know, they leave out the good stuff. And
right.
yeah, so take me through that.
I think, you know, people want to focus on trans suffering and trans pain, and that was not the sum of our stories, right? And so when these filmmakers would come into our communities and tell these stories, it was always the most bleak, dire stories ever imaginable, as if we couldn't elevate ourselves out of those situations, right? So taking the narrative ourselves, because they're forgetting the joy, the happiness, the things that we do in order to survive in a world that constantly throws us out. You know what I mean? They weren't showing those things, right? And so it was important to pick up the camera and make sure that we do, because, you know, not too long ago, there were so many things within the media that wasn't perceiving trans people as human even. So we began to document and highlight trans lives and stories over a course of 15, 16 years. Yeah, it was important. It was a need of our community. It was a need of, you know, being able to share the stories as we see them, how we experience life.
What do you think when you look at that footage of yourself from 15 years ago?
I had to really process what I was looking at, because it's a version of myself that I was not necessarily proud of. You know, at that time I was a very feral person because I was living on the streets. You know what I mean? And so when I looked at her, I wanted to hide her away. You know what I mean? But when I started to look at the footage, and I was like, but she is the one who brought me here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I began to embrace the footage and realize who I actually am.
I think for everyone in this film that speaks to you, there's this people grappling with the idea that, you know, the Stroll, they were doing what they needed to do to survive, but it also was a place where they could find a community and find people who knew them and be out in the open. And someone says in the film that I was safer out there than I ever was in that house. And that really struck me. But, you know, what was the challenge in finding those layers and telling both sides of that story?
Yeah, how did we find the balance of the story?
Laughter.
Yeah.
You know, I realized that laughter was like laughter, and being, you know, when we reach out into the world trying to find ourselves, we're trying to find people that are like us, whether we're filmmakers or other artists, you know, or, you know, other women or men, groups of people, you know. And so when we leave home or when we're discarded from our families or people that can't accept us, it's important to find people that we identify with and build a community. And then we build chosen families, you know? And so laughter is a part of that, because you find friends that you can kiki with and forget about the struggle. Yeah. You know,
a fun moment where the cop car comes by and you hear the sirens in the interview, and I hope their tires burst. I thought that was
yeah. I mean, and even that, like running from the police was, you know, we were keying the whole time. You know, it was like a game of cat and mouse. So it's like, oh my God, Meg, and we're dipping under the cars and stuff, and you know, we pop right back out. And it was like, I always refer to it as sort of like the Ralph Wolf and Ralph and the Wolf, you know, and the Looney Tunes comedies, you know, is how they come and they chase you around and check in and check out and stuff. But like, it wasn't all the trauma. It wasn't all of the pain. You know, it was there, but we had to keep going because we couldn't give up. We had to continue to hustle.
Yeah.
Or we would slip through the cobblestones.
So Zackary, how did you get involved with this project? You've worked on Transparent, you have a background in docs, but how did you connect with Kristen?
Working on this project has been the honor of my career. It's been such an incredible collaboration, working with Kristen and receiving this history and being a conduit for this story. I feel like we are messengers on earth for so many trans people who did not survive, and that the communities that we find and the sense of sisterhood is truly what keeps us alive and what has kept us alive. The laughter and the joy is essential to our survival. And sex work is how trans folks have survived for centuries. You can look back into, newspapers from early America and then, 18th century. And
Like
because
Swan, he had a whole brothel. She had a whole brothel.
you could just go down the list. Trans people always had to exist in the margins. And in underground economies, it just wasn't possible to get legitimate employment if your ID, or your how you were known didn't match the way you were presenting.
Was there a challenge in finding people who were still around back when the Stroll was at its most active? Because you have a really powerful segment in this movie where someone has been in prison for 14 years, only sentenced for 5 to 7, and now comes out and finds so many people have died and moved on, or that just the world is completely different. Was it challenging to find people who were willing to talk or who remembered this era?
In some ways, yes, it was. Some people deal with shame. Some people don't want to rehash what was going on out there at the time. Sometimes it is a source of trauma for most people.
And at the same time, so many legends in our communities have a history in the Stroll. And there's almost like, I think especially for our generation and older, of trans people who came out, in the early 2000s and the 90s and the 80s, everybody has some relationship.
It was hard to find people to want to share their stories, and those that did come, wanted to be limited with the things that they shared. But a lot of the subjects that we have in the film, and especially the one that you're making reference to, we drew that out of them because of the conversation, because of the experiences that we share. Like I never, spent 14 years in prison, but I was in and out of Rikers Island. So I know the processes, I know how the guys are and what goes on in those atmospheres.
RuPaul makes an appearance in this movie through some archival footage, and it doesn't feel like you were actually that enamored with that footage. Take me through what you... what was your reaction when you saw that, and how he viewed the Stroll? And have you been able to talk with RuPaul at all about this time?
When I think about it, I've stayed in the Jane where Ru was living. I think, when Drag Race came out and there was the controversy of not allowing trans women to compete, and, even though it's a part of trans culture and history, it was a disservice to the community. And we never forgot that, and to see her gallivanting in those same streets that we walked around and where she walked too, it's like, girl, what are you doing? And continually denied the existence of transness when you've made your entire career off of transness. So we can look at it and be like, you were in trans space.
And I think that, assertion from RuPaul was always that drag queens and trans women had a shared cultural experience, and that it was all the same at the time. And I think that clip just makes it so clear that he was in a very different situation, that there was a class difference between living in the, upper floor penthouse suite of the Jane Hotel and the girls
where other girls who were struggling to work the Stroll I stayed in the Jane Street. You know what I mean? Like paying that $135 a week for a room. You know what I mean? Like it was a part of our area, our culture. If you weren't in the Jane Street because you couldn't afford it, you were on the pier in a shack. You know what I mean?
The movie ends very hopefully with, talking about the repeal of the walking while trans and law. And what is the next step of this fight? What do you hope people take away from this film, and how you hope people respond?
I think we have to destigmatize sex work. And I think that, when the trans movement started, or this version of the trans movement came to fruition a decade ago. There was a respectability politic that came in that really tried to sanitize the trans experience and take sex work out of it. But the truth is that sex worker stories are trans stories, and that trans people have survived doing sex work for centuries.
And the fact that trans people need to work, regardless of it being sex work or whatever type of work. And still to this day, you see very limited trans people in positions working. You know what I mean? And so that's definitely something we have to work on. We have to get away from, this, oh, we have to be this one way. This is America. We have the freedom to be who we want to be, express ourselves any way that we want to express ourselves. It's in our Constitution. You know what I mean? So like if somebody wants to be a waitress with a beard and wear a tutu, they should be able to. You know what I mean? But like it's hire trans people. It's, give people the opportunity to be who they are. You know what I mean? And as far as the Walking While Trans repeal, it's time to really start looking at our justice system and really putting into action the things that are being legislated, Like if that's what you did, then make sure that you follow through and erase that aspects of one's life.
And right here in Utah, there's 3 bills, preventing adolescents from seeking gender-affirming care. It went through the House, the Utah House, and now it's going through the Utah State Senate. And these bills are sweeping the country in an effort to dial back the hands of time and to resist a modernizing world. But no matter how you try to legislate against us, nothing will prevent us from being born into the world.